All right, all you positive heads. On this week's SoulShare episode, I'm very excited to have David Robson here with me on the show. David is an author whose previous book, The Expectation Effect, won the British Psychological Society Book Award for 2022. And he's just about to release a new book called The Laws of Connection, The Scientific Secrets of Building a Strong Social Network. Hello, David. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, this is really timely with what some of the things that are going on in my life and projects that are just kind of launching. So I was really excited to have this conversation, and I just got your new book that's about to come out, and haven't had a chance to read it yet, but look forward to that as well. So this is, yeah, like I said, very timely, and excited to dive in with you. And before we do, I don't want to skip over my cliche opening question, which is this. You're in an elevator. The woman next to you looks over, says, "What's your passion?" You have 10 floors to answer. What do you say?
Literature and culture.
Apparently. Well, David, if you would, just take a moment to share whatever feels, yeah, relevant to set the stage, so we understand a little bit, about your backstory and how you got to where you're at. Yeah, if you would, like I said, whatever feels relevant to share.
Okay, yeah. So I'm a science writer. I studied mathematics at Cambridge University, specialising in medical statistics, and then moved into science journalism soon after. I worked at New Scientist magazine, which is, if your audience aren't familiar with it, is kind of the British equivalent of Scientific American,
Mm-hmm.
where I was a feature editor. Then I was a senior journalist at the BBC. All the while, I really specialised in writing about medicine and health and psychology and neuroscience, and the kind of interplay between all of these fields. So my books are often like this kind of sweet spot where I'm looking at how our mindsets or our social relationships can influence our health.
Mm.
And that's exactly what, the laws of connection, first of all, examines, why social relationships are so important for living a good, healthy, long life. And the research shows it is incredibly important. So I explore some of the mechanisms behind that. And then I look at all of the ways that we can enhance our social connections, like
Mm.
based on, really cutting edge psychological science that's identifying the kinds of barriers that just stop us from finding those opportunities to connect and to strengthen our relationships.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, yeah, to give you a little insight into my situation here, I live in a co-living and event space in Los Angeles. We call the Mystic Manor, and we do, we're sort of a hub for, let's say, conscious community culture, in the area. Sort of a lot of people that go to like Burning Man Festival, if you're familiar. I'd imagine you've heard of it over there, and
Right.
transformational festivals, and sort of like a spiritual centric, I guess, community. Most of them, anyway. And yeah, so we do regular events and gatherings, and we're just launching a new membership that's going to be like a regular gathering every, little less party centric. Our bigger events that we've done every 8 to 10 weeks, it's going to be like, a few times a month, and it's more networking and, highlighting maybe a interview like this at some point, during the 5 hour window, and, you know, um, maybe some music and artists and painting and, that kind of thing. So, and we're calling that Mystic Society, and just launching that actually in June. So yeah, and then from there, I have sort of a project that's going to be a conscious art community DAO, using blockchain to allow artists to share music rights with fans and creating community around that. So my whole trajectory is all about building, in real life, networks and community, and online and virtually, and bringing people together, like I said, at our space, and then, around art, and then, with a DAO, then taking the resources and creating events and different things, whatever we decide to do with it, right? So when I saw you as a potential to talk to, I was just very curious to hear everything that you've sort of learned about, the power of of coming together, and of that sort of networking effect of, like, the is the sum greater than the equal parts kind of thing when we come together to work on a project or focus on things. And so, yeah, I'd love to just kind of hear your high level of, what you've uncovered. Obviously, we can dive deep into all of it, but what you've uncovered regarding the power of social networks, and the
Yeah.
importance.
Yeah. So, I mean, you really can't overstate how important social networks are. Um, it's just a fundamental desire and hunger that we humans have, is
Yeah.
to be connected to other people. It's as strong, I would say, as our hunger for food, for
Mm-hmm.
water, for sex. And that's because it's fundamental for survival. So we
Yeah.
even have, it seems like we have these loneliness neurons that, they fire more and more rapidly.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the longer we spend without other people,
Mm.
it's creating
Interesting.
that kind of basic need to go and seek other people. The reason, if we look in evolutionary history, the reason that would have been the case is because we evolved to live in larger and larger groups and to depend on others for kind of pooled resources and for protection from
Yeah.
predators from other groups. And so, if you were beginning to feel isolated from the people around you, you were being excluded. That needed to you needed some really strong signal to warn you about what was happening, and that is the
Mm-hmm.
social pain that we feel, and it feels very close to physical pain
Mm-hmm.
because it's so important for survival. It's, a physical pain is warning you about a wound on your body, while social pain is warning you about a wound um, to this network that is
Mm.
also essential um, for your survival.
Yeah.
And so, if you look at the physiological consequences of being lonely, you find that what's really happening in the body is that it's trying to preempt all the kind of threats that you would have faced um, if you were kind of isolated and on your own in the wild.
Mm.
So, um, without the protection of others, you're much more likely to be attacked by a predator,
Right.
which is going to lead to injury. So the body increases levels of inflammation, which is the
Mm.
immune system's first line of defense against a bacterial infection.
Wow.
That's great in the short term if you are actually injured, but in the long term, inflammation is a major risk factor for lots of different diseases, from heart disease to Alzheimer's disease to diabetes.
Yeah.
And so that is why, when you look at these longitudinal studies tracking people's health for years and years and years, you find that people who are lonely are at a higher risk of all of those diseases, and people who
Wow.
have strong social connection are at a much lower risk. So
Mm.
actually, that then affects how likely you are to die. So if you have lots of social support, you're more likely to live a long and healthy life.
Wow.
Now, in addition to all of those benefits for our health, social connection can enhance creativity,
Mm.
because the more people you speak to, especially if they come from different backgrounds with different perspectives, the more that you have this kind of creative cross pollination of ideas that can fuel innovation. And I think, anyone who's working in a creative industry has kind of felt that, but we can also see it amongst the kind of histories of scientists. People like Isaac Newton, who definitely didn't have like a kind of he wasn't easy to get on with, Isaac Newton, but he still nevertheless had a very big social network.
Yeah.
He was constantly exchanging ideas with his peers, and that helped him to refine a lot of his theories that would become very influential. You
Yeah.
can see it amongst Broadway composers and choreographers. You can see it in the arts, with like literature, like the Bloomsbury Group, with like people like Virginia Woolf and T.S. Eliot, who are, all exchanging their new ideas about the way that society should operate, and discussing how, we should kind of change social norms. So, it's really fundamental then for just the growth of culture.
Yeah.
And finally, it gives us more financial security. Like if you're well connected socially, you'll find it easier to get a job.
Hmm.
Because so many of us, when we're looking for work, like we can certainly apply for kind of jobs through like LinkedIn or, that are advertised, but often you hear about new work from
Hmm.
your professional connections. And, if you've been nurturing those connections, you're going to have more of those opportunities come your way.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah, that makes total sense. I'm curious how you what your feeling is regarding um, the social networks that of course become so huge and influential in our lives, but yet it's not necessarily a pure social network because there's a corporation with an agenda of monetization behind it and hacking our you know dopamine receptors and like
Right.
all these things, and so I'm curious, what you're someone who's looked so deeply at the subject, what you feel about sort of um, the version of social networking that has become so predominant in the last 10 plus years.
Yeah. So, sometimes you could call these antisocial networks,
Mm,
because um, they can encourage. I think this is definitely true that they can encourage social comparison and competition between people,
yeah,
and it's not a healthy competition. Like if you're always comparing yourself to the kind of polished veneer that someone else is presenting on Instagram or Facebook,
right.
that can diminish your own self-esteem and leave you feeling like you're underachieving. Now
Right.
you can try to kind of get on that kind of treadmill and try to compete with those other people by producing a polished veneer yourself.
Hmm.
I don't think, no matter how many likes you get for those posts, I don't think that is increasing your sense of social connection, because fundamentally you still know that you're presenting something that is inauthentic, and you
Yeah.
still are aware of all of the kind of pain that you might be suffering,
Yeah.
the things that are not going right in your life. So, I
Right.
think that is why people who, have millions of followers, people like Lizzo, the singer, still report sometimes feeling very lonely, because it's
Yeah.
not enough to just have that interaction through social media. Now, I would say I do think that social media and technology in general can be beneficial for connection. So I was
Hmm.
kind of half joking when I called these anti-social
You're right.
networks, because I still think we can consciously, mindfully choose to use them in a way that enhances connection. So
Yeah.
if you see someone celebrating, a good moment in your life, you can celebrate it with them.
Yeah.
You can give a candid view of your own life. You can share something, one of your own vulnerabilities that other people might really relate to, and you might be surprised actually by the amount of empathy that you
Yeah.
get from those
Right.
people. So I certainly think that we have to have a nuanced discussion about social networks and technology in particular. They're
Hmm.
instruments like any other tool that human beings have been using for hundreds of thousands of years. They can be used for good or ill, and we have to think more carefully just about the way that we're using it.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah. Makes total sense. Like so many things, right? The scalpel can be used to heal. It can be used to kill.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
and I'm really curious to see how some, you know, social networks evolve that are really rooted in more of the um, I guess less of an agenda of a corporate, behemoth trying to see how many zeros it can put on its valuation, and more about creating the most authentic, purest, platform that that there could be. Um, yeah, we'll see where it goes from here. It's definitely been an interesting journey with that whole thing, and it, to switch gears just a little bit to your book that it just has received the Psychological Society Book Award in 2022, and Expectation Effect. I'm curious if you could just share a little bit about that book and just in general. I haven't had the chance to read it personally, and a lot of things come to mind when I hear the expectation effect. So could you just share with me with us what that is about at a high level?
Sure. Yeah. So the expectation effect as a phenomenon is just that is when we create self-fulfilling prophecies
Mm,
from our beliefs, and
mm,
that can happen through three main mechanisms. In my opinion, it can be changes to our perception,
mm-hmm,
changes to our behavior,
mm-hmm,
and changes to our physiology, and all
mm-hmm.
of these can interact. Now, the most famous and well-known example of this is the placebo effect in medicine.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for a long time, scientists believed that the effects of placebos were just purely subjective.
Yeah.
People were kind of fooling themselves, just
Mm-hmm.
imagining that they felt better.
Yep.
Now, there may well be a small element of that, but what we also know is that they are having a real physiological effect in many
Yeah.
cases, not in all cases, because it depends on the particular situation and the kind of illness that the placebo is being used to treat. But
Right.
there's certainly ways that that our beliefs can influence things like pain management, for example, because the brain can produce its own endogenous opioids. So
Mm-hmm.
when it's expecting to receive a painkiller, the brain can actually start upping its own production of these opioids, which it would produce naturally anyway in response to certain events. The runner's high that we get after working out is just the brain producing these opioids. Um, Sometimes when people go into shock after a an accident and they don't feel pain immediately, it's because the brain is producing these opioids.
Yeah.
So the placebo is just a tool that is helping people to
Mm.
produce them. And the reason it does that is because if you've received painkillers in the past, the brain kind of knows what to expect when it's receiving the pill. And so you take an identical pill, and the brain, it's feeling relief, and then it's trying to kind of increase the efficiency of that pill and how it will work. So it kind of starts to produce its own opioids, preempting the kind of ingestion of even more of these
Mm-hmm.
opioids.
Mm-hmm.
So we know that happens. It's happening even when you take a real painkiller. So there was research looking at patients who had just undergone surgery, some of whom were given their morphine injection um, overtly. The doctor kind of told them what he was doing while he gave them the pain relief. So increasing their expectations of how much pain relief they were going to experience.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in other cases, the morphine was just delivered through their intravenous drip.
Yep.
So the patient had no idea they were actually getting this drug.
Mm-hmm.
And what the research showed was that the people who received that painkiller overtly from the doctor had about twice as much pain relief as the person who received the painkiller through their drip. Or put
Wow.
another way, the person who received it through the drip needed twice as much morphine to achieve the same level of pain
Wow.
relief.
Wow.
So yeah, it's kind of that's incredible. There are lots of other ways that the placebos can influence physiology through. We
Mm-hmm.
spoke about inflammation earlier and the how social connections can reduce inflammation because we're kind of not expecting to be injured. If we have lots of social support, we'll actually, you know, a placebo treatment can do the same thing. It's like once you know you're being cared for by other people, the body can reduce its inflammation because the risk of infection is already becoming less relevant. And the placebo is almost like a symbol of that social support that you're receiving.
Mm.
Um, you know, and so that's the most, I think, the most kind of that's the starting point for the expectation effect. But then what I show is that actually, it's the expectation effect is not just restricted to um, the clinical setting. Our expectations are shaping our responses to things like exercise or diet.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it can shape how you respond to stress. So if you
Mm-hmm.
expect stress to be bad for your health and to be a sign of failure when you're under pressure, you tend to have worse outcomes than if you see stress as this kind of inevitable inevitable part of the growing process
Right.
and something that can actually energize and enhance your experience.
Right.
Um, then, when you have that positive mindset, you tend to have much better outcomes, both cognitively, in your attentional focus, your creativity, but also physiologically. Your body actually responds to the stress in a different way. So rather than putting strain on your heart, it's just really helping you to pump more oxygen to your brain, but
Mm.
without it being like such a heavy workload for your heart that it's causing damage.
Yeah.
I mean, our expectations, I found, can even influence the aging process. People who have positive views of aging
Mm-hmm.
tend to be, they tend to live around 7.5 years longer than people who have negative
Mm-hmm.
expectations of the aging process. So it's like every area of life are influenced by your expectations. It's very powerful. And I've just one final point is that I'm not claiming that like positive thinking can kind of work actual miracles. So I don't think there's good scientific evidence say that positive thinking alone could cure you from cancer because I don't think there's a mechanism by which your expectations could
Mm-hmm.
specifically target the tumor. But
Mm-hmm.
even there, I don't think it's irrelevant because what we do know is that the side effects of certain treatments like chemotherapy are shaped by expectations. That nausea, the fatigue, the pain that you experience
Yeah.
will be affected by expectations. So having positive expectations, and doctors are looking into ways that they can use this, can improve treatments even for those kind of terrible illnesses. But the expectations alone are not going to be the cure, they're not the treatment for those
Yeah.
illnesses.
Yeah. I had, I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Bruce Lipton. He wrote a book called
Yes,
The
yeah.
Biology of Belief, and he talks about nocebo.
Yeah,
So working in
yeah.
the opposite direction as well, when you have sort of a negative perception about what's going to happen, and then how that can be a self fulfilling prophecy as well. And I definitely use this in my own life. I mean, I've told this story my whole life. I don't. Maybe since a teenager, I don't believe in getting sick. And I just kind of profess that to anyone who will listen. And I can't say I've never been sick, but very little. I've never really been in a hospital. I've never, had any major illness, no aches and pains, and it's, I just kind of started aligning with that expectation, that belief, and tried to get people to share that expectation and that belief, and it has definitely yielded very positive results in my own life. And so, what I love about this, of course, someone who really leans heavy into looking at the sort of the spiritual side of some of this stuff, and that we're one with the source consciousness that creates and animates all things, and through our beliefs we're creating our reality. And so I love seeing how the science really supports it. And like you said, I mean, you can't say, okay, I'm going to just expect the tumor is going to disappear, and it does. However, there are some really miraculous, inexplicable healings out there that the doctors will do. We have no idea. You're supposed to die next week and it's gone. The cancer's gone,
Mm.
So, there is certainly some miraculous healings that transpire. No one can fully pinpoint how, when, where, why, but I think that is really points to the reality that we're just scratching the surface on understanding how this whole life thing is truly working under the hood.
Yeah, totally. I mean, spontaneous remission, definitely is a scientific phenomenon. Like we know some people's tumors, like very rare cases, but yeah, they do miraculously disappear. And so, like, I think it is amazing now that scientists are studying this systematically to try to work out like what the factors are that could contribute to that and what can we learn. Like, what has triggered the immune system in some of these cases to actually
Mm-hmm.
attack the tumor. We just don't know all of the factors, but there's probably many different reasons for that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's going to be interesting to see how it sort of continues to evolve our perspectives, and these. It should be interesting as we have more knowledge about the inner workings of some of these things and how that knowledge spreads, and then how it actually impacts self-healing or, whatnot. And I, I I don't really write anything off as a potential. It could become, oh, okay, 100 years from now, we realize that human flight is possible, and now that belief is spread, and all of a sudden that becomes like the consensus norm. And so, because everyone believes it, it creates that reality. I mean, obviously, that's a very extreme example, but I think we're going to be shocked by some of the realizations how malleable um, reality actually is based off consensus belief,
Hmm.
ultimately.
Yeah, and like say if we look at the kind of science of, like why kind of beliefs are so important with the aging process. What
Mm-hmm.
I love is that there are multiple mechanisms there
Mm-hmm.
that are, and each of them is important.
Yep.
So, like it seems pretty clear, and the evidence backs this up, that if you are more optimistic about your kind of years after retirement, like you're just gonna put more effort into kind of looking after your body. Like you're
Yeah.
gonna feel better going to the gym.
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna, take a bit more care over like your diet. You
Yeah.
might not take so many risks with things like alcohol or smoking.
Yeah.
That is all that's relevant, and it's like actually, if that alone was the effective mindset, well, that would be in itself really important to try to get people to have that more positive mindset so they do take more care of themselves. But what we see is that the effects of mindset, do again extend to like the physiological response, and it doesn't have to be uh, like it can actually be a very kind of prosaic explanation even there, and it's simply that if you worry about getting old because you associate that with disability and illness and forgetfulness and
Mm-hmm.
dementia, you're going to start to feel pretty kind of stressed. Like you're going to have like feel a lot of fret when you go out to do, even basic chores or
Yep.
run errands. Going to the shops, meeting new friends,
Mm-hmm.
all of these kinds of things, and that's going to increase the expression of the stress hormone cortisol, which in small doses when you're actually facing a challenge is like perfectly good for you, like nothing wrong with it. But if you're
Mm-hmm.
facing that kind of day after day after day and it's unrelenting, um, that's going to cause damage to your body. And that is
Yeah.
what we see, that you actually, when you kind of draw a graph of people's cortisol levels as they get older after middle life, you see that the people with the negative viewpoints have increasing levels of cortisol, while those with the positive views kind of relax into their retirement. They have got built up all these skills to cope with life stresses. So they
Yeah.
actually show uh, reduced levels of cortisol as they get
Mm-hmm.
older.
Mm-hmm.
And then you
Big
can look at
difference.
the right, yeah. I mean, and then you can see the effects like right down to the kind of individual cells. We know
Mm-hmm.
that kind of constant stress has an effect on things like uh, gene expression, so which genes are turned on or off, and you can see that people with the positive mindset about aging, uh, they tend to show fewer of those age-related changes to
Yeah.
gene expression. We call that the epigenetic clock, those patterns of gene expression that are associated with aging. And for people with the positive view, they just tend to, have clocks that tick at a slower rate, which
Mm-hmm.
means that all of those illnesses that come with aging, like dementia or
Mm-hmm.
cardiovascular disease, are just less likely to occur as a result.
Mm. Yeah, once again, I mean, I was just telling someone yesterday, we had a great social gathering of about 15 people. And there's a couple of very small children and people, a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old. And we're all sitting and talking. And I'm like, oh, yeah, someone said, oh, we're all parents here. And I'm like, someone's like, oh, how old's your child? And I'm like, oh, he's 25, about to turn 26. And they're like, what? And it's, I'm 49. I've never had an acre of pain. I am very much youthful in what I do. And obviously I've done the Positive Head podcast for 10 years. I feel like actions or results speak the loudest, and it's like, what is my thought about aging? The story that I'm telling, the belief that I'm telling is, oh, someone like Ray Kurzweil a few weeks ago saying, oh, if you're alive in 5 years, you could live to be 500, the well-known
Yeah,
futurist. AI is about to change everything.
yeah,
And so I think of it in terms, the story that I tell is like, oh, as I've sort of had my own remembering regarding the ultimate nature of reality and consciousness, and like the belief that I'm one with source, and having, a spirit having a soul, having a human experience. And it's like, oh, okay, as I become more aware of the nature of the situation in which I find myself, um, more information, it would make sense that I'd show up at a time right on the precipice of incredible advancements that take us from living to 100 to 500 or beyond, and then it's like you start thinking in those terms, and it's like, oh, well, hold on, well, maybe I haven't even reached 10% of my life yet, and I just get the honor of being like, hundreds of years from now, the oldest vampire,
right,
oh, it's one of the originals, who made the cutoff.
yeah,
And that's the story that I'm telling, and I'm not attached to that. I don't need to
yeah,
live beyond the normal, 80, 90 years, whatever, to I and so that to me, taking on that perspective, I mean, I feel like, and it makes sense too, because it's like, man, it would be a shame for me to leave so soon. I'm just getting good. I'm just working out a lot of the kinks and the things that I feel like have maybe held back my ancestral line, the overcoming trauma, really doing the self work, really, so yeah, that's sort of the story that I weave regarding all this, and it's very inspiring and keeps me fulfilled. And even if, like I said, I die at a normal age, what we would consider a normal age, that's fine too. Like, those years are so rich. And so it's, yeah, I think it's especially now, there's a lot of, you talked about the placebo, and like, oh, I expect the morphine, and therefore, that story, that prompt helped to create the reality. And now we have these great stories and prompts coming in from scientists about like, oh, you're going to have an AI doctor that knows every piece of medicine that's ever happened, including everything about you, and it's your personal doctor. Like, it's everything's there for us to, you know, to grab onto if we really want to take that optimistic outlook, I believe.
yeah, definitely. And like there's that cliche that we should live like every day like it's our last. And well, I can see the thinking behind that, and I do kind of agree that we shouldn't take life for granted, like absolutely not. But I also think like there's a lot to be said for kind of living life as if you're like a 5-year old kid and you've still got all these possibilities ahead of
Agreed.
you.
Agreed.
One of my favorite people that I interviewed for my book, as a kind of case study in good aging, was Paddy Jones, who's the world's oldest acrobatic salsa dancer. And she
Cool.
had enjoyed dancing when she was a kid, and then kind of got married, had kids. That took her away from dancing. And then her husband died when she was in her early 60s, and as part of the grieving process, she just kind of thought, like, how about taking it up again?
Mm.
And she did. And she found this new form of dance that she hadn't tried before. She learnt it from scratch.
Mm-hmm.
She became so successful that she has performed globally. She's appeared on like talent shows in like Argentina, in
Mm.
Germany, in Spain.
Cool.
She appeared at the big Sanremo Music Festival in Italy, performing with one of the biggest bands in Italy. That's she's in her 80s now, and she's continuing, and that's
Amazing.
what I would like to be like when I'm her age.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the only Bible quotes I will reference uh, with regularity is, well, it's not exact, but basically, lest you become like a child, you can't enter the kingdom of heaven. And it's like
Yeah.
that childlike wonder is, really, there's great wisdom in bringing on,
Mm.
like the person the other day, what, you have a 25-year-old? And I was like, yeah, I thought I was 25. Like, well, it's weird,
Yeah.
and cool too at the same time. And so I think, yeah, being that poster adult for childhood is a really good aim. and and seeing the people like the woman you just referenced, who are doing it, show you that I always say, um, aging isn't optional. Getting old is, you
Mm.
know, and she has chosen to age with vigor, right? And I think that's a really good choice.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's also, you can put this another way, like, which I discovered when you look at the research, and it's like, well, like you said, like aging is an inevitable process, but like we, I think in the past, especially, and I think this is changing, we've seen the kind of the speed of aging, the effects of aging, as being totally without, like, outside of our control. Like there was nothing that we could do to kind of
Yeah.
prevent us from having those age-related um, physiological changes that would predispose us to illness. But actually, there are so many just like lifestyle factors that
Yeah.
do influence how quickly you age. And obviously, like social connection is
Yeah.
one of them,
Right.
mindset is another, exercise is another, diet is another. But
Yeah.
all of these things, they do actually just slow down that process. They reduce the chance that you're going to have those. That your organs, each individual organ, is going to kind of age at a quicker rate compared to a slower rate.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. And yeah, it's inspiring to realize how much control we have,
Mm.
in the process. So I think so many people have, thought otherwise. And as we unpack and learn and more and have more examples like this woman, we see like, oh, this there is another path to take. And um, yeah, so it's very inspiring. I'm curious, with the to kind of jump back and forth between the two topics, the with the networking, social networks, and so forth. What is it? How do you see this with all the changes that are happening in our world, and AI, and it's such a time of like unknowns, and the old world is changing before our eyes, and I'm curious what you foresee if you had to step into your oracle, David. What do you think will be some of the new ways that we establish, you know, positive, powerful social networks in the future?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing that's certain is that the importance of social connection is not going to
Yeah,
diminish
yeah,
with
right.
technological uh, evolution. And in
Yeah,
fact, I think like all that's going to happen is that it will change the way we interact, and I hope it will improve the way we interact. Which I think we've seen with other developments. I was saying how social networks can be, can be beneficial if we use the tool in the right way. But if you look back at like the telephone,
hmm,
that actually provided people with a lot of social connection that they just
right.
didn't have before. It helped us to overcome the challenges that came with the Industrial Revolution, with
Yeah,
people living further away from their families, with greater urbanization.
yeah,
The telephone was an important tool that help families to stay connected even when they weren't geographically in the same place.
yeah,
I see developments like Zoom as being super
hmm,
important. Like, and we saw that in the pandemic with when we were physically distancing from other people. That actually, Zoom conversations were uh, one way of helping people to maintain their social
right.
connections. The research suggests that I mean, like, so the research definitely shows face to face communication is better overall for our perception of social connection compared to video calls, and then that is better than, say, voice calls, which is better than just sending a text message.
Yeah,
But they're all still good things to do.
yeah,
Um, we shouldn't assume that if we can't meet up with people face to face, that it's not worth maintaining the
yeah,
connection, because actually the other person is going to appreciate even a short text message. You're going to feel better sending that text message.
hmm,
And so when I look to the future with things like virtual reality, like my prediction would be that maybe that does give us a bit more of the feeling of being physically present with people
yeah,
than Zoom calls do. So that, I would hope, would be, would just be another tool that we can use to feel close to the people who maybe aren't in our lives. You know, I think there's a lot of reason to be optimistic.
Mm.
I want like I know people speculate about whether like we could become friends with an AI agent
Hmm.
if that would be meaningful. I certainly think that for some individuals, like it could be a way for someone who's lonely and doesn't have the human connection to kind of get some of that feeling of being understood. But I think it's going to lack, I think the knowledge, if we accept that AIs aren't really conscious,
Yeah.
um, then I think like that the knowledge that it's not really thinking and feeling the things that it seems to be, I
Yeah.
think will be a kind of barrier that will reduce the benefits. But we even know watching TV for lonely people,
Yeah.
um, look, we shouldn't knock it because actually that does at least give you some sense of connection that can be good for your health too. So
Yeah.
I think
Right.
AI would be an evolution of that, really.
Right. Right. What would you say to the person out there listening to this who, um, obviously, like I've shared some of my journey, I have a lot of social interaction and connection, and really grateful for that. And there are people on the other end of the spectrum who feel isolated, don't have a community around them or a hub that they're a part of, and they really and social networks only make them feel more isolated, or not living up to the standard of whatever polished life someone is displaying out there. What would someone do to kind of change that, and try and
Mm.
really start establishing? I know you talk about laws of connection and things like that, so just, yeah, curious if you have any insight or advice for someone like that.
Yeah, exactly. So, in the laws of connection, I kind of describe 13 laws that can help us to build better relationships with, strangers who might become close friends, and then
Hmm.
help us to maintain the relationships that we already have. So that's what I found really encouraging and optimistic about this research is that it's all very actionable.
Hmm.
These guiding principles do tell us how we can find that connection when we do feel isolated or lonely. Now, the first step I think is to to realize that your expectations of a lot of these interactions are just going to be more pessimistic than they need to
Hmm.
be. And so
Ah.
imagine that you're feeling lonely and you just want to go out and talk to a stranger. Like we're
Hmm.
told that's good for us. It is good for us.
Hmm.
But and every friendship has started with an interaction
That's
with
right.
someone you didn't know. So it's necessary. But the research shows that people vastly overestimate how awkward those interactions are going to be. They just think
Mm.
it's not going to be so pleasant to talk to someone on the commute, in a coffee shop, in the park. You
Yeah.
know, um, we're worried about rejection. We're worried that we're going to bore the other person. All of these things. So we don't expect to enjoy it, which is why we don't do it. But the research shows that if you ask people before and then after those interactions, people's perceptions afterwards are always much better than their
Mm.
predictions had been. So they
Mm.
always, statistically speaking, they are much more likely to enjoy the experience, to feel that connection than they had ever
Mm.
expected.
Interesting.
Um, and the problem is that we probably do experience this when we have those interactions, when we really have to talk to a stranger. Like you know, we will find that it's better for us than we thought, but we don't do it enough, and so we forget about that good experience, and the kind of old predictions, still come to mind. That old those anxieties that it's going to be awkward.
Hmm.
We don't do essentially we don't practice these social skills enough to update the brain's predictions so that
Hmm.
we will build that confidence. And so, what
Mm.
the research shows us is that actually just making it to be like a conscious intention for
Mm.
every day, say, to try to talk to someone that you
Mm.
don't know.
Mm.
That is the key to recalibrating those
Mm.
expectations so that you feel more confident. And what the research shows is that, when people set this plan, with specific goals, like I will help someone with their groceries in the supermarket,
Mm-hmm.
or I will talk to someone with a cute dog in the park. They
Yeah.
have like specific situations that they're
Mm,
looking for. What you find is that when people set those plans and enact them, after only 5 days, they're already feeling a lot more optimistic about those interactions. They feel more
amazing.
confident. They're less worried about rejection,
Amazing.
and that lasts, for at least a week afterwards.
Mm,
So, for someone who is feeling lonely and shy, I would say, pushing yourself out of the comfort zone
mm,
is one of the best things that you can do,
yeah.
with constant, you know, practice. Now, there's other things, that we can do to ease that process. I think, like, one of the things that really struck me as being very easy to do is to deliver more compliments and praise to people. Again, we have psychological barriers that prevent us from doing that because we are worried that we'll sound kind of clumsy, that we don't have the kind of social competence to deliver that compliment in a way that will be appreciated by the other person.
Yeah.
And the research shows that's unfounded too.
Mm.
Like, you don't have to be this kind of super charismatic, suave person
I
to
think
be
that's a
able
big
to.
misconception. They see
Right,
someone like that and they're like, oh, well, I'm not that charismatic or suave. Therefore, I equate that to I can't deliver
exactly.
the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas people, they respond really well, as you would hope, to
And they
hearing something
sometimes find it
nice. Yeah.
endearing if someone's a little
Oh
clumsy with
yeah,
a
totally.
delivery, or they're kind of like a little shy-ish about it. It's like, oh, it's like it's a different positive effect. I've seen it so many times.
Yeah, exactly. That is something that comes out in the research. All of the research that I look at on the laws of connection is that
Mm.
we like massively amplify the importance of our like what we think is something clumsy or like a faux pas
Mm.
or a mistake, and like people just aren't judging you as badly as you think they were.
Yeah,
Like
you're
unless
your worst
someone's
critic by far.
right,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And so, just complimenting someone, and it could be a stranger, who you just think,
Hmm.
like, wow, that guy or that woman, like, they're just dressed like, amazingly, like, they've
Hmm.
got a real sense of style. Or
Hmm.
it could be, you've attended a talk and you just go up to the speaker and say, like, I loved what you said. Like, I really appreciated your message.
Hmm.
We can do this virtually. Like, you can just send a kind of thank you note to like your favorite author or singer,
Hmm.
or someone who's posted something that you found inspirational on a social network.
Yeah,
Just telling them, I liked what you said. The research shows the other person will feel better for it and you will feel better for it
for
too.
sure.
It's one of these ways that you can build up your confidence just by doing that, by being a bit braver in one of the kind of most pleasant social interactions that you can have.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I definitely know whenever it never gets old to hear feedback, positive
No,
feedback from someone
not at
listening to
all.
the show.
Yeah,
I don't care how it's delivered, what
yeah.
means, how slick of a writer you are, how, and so often over the years, I've gotten that message of, oh, I've been nervous to write this for years. And I finally did. And I'm like, meanwhile, it's so funny because they've got all this perception about how it's received. And, on my end, it's like, it's just appreciated no matter what, how every word could be misspelled, you know
Right.
and so I think that's really important, and I love what you said about coming up with a trigger, if you will. Like, okay,
Mm.
this is pushing me out of my comfort zone, so it's already hard enough, but what if I set a scenario so that then when I see the scenario, it's like, okay, there it is, like the dog, I'm going to compliment the person's dog, or maybe stop and ask
Mm.
to pet the dog where I normally wouldn't. And creating those sort of things that then when you're out, and I think it makes sense that it would help you to get over that fear. If you, okay, I'm walking out the door, and if I see a dog, I'm this time going to say something about it and see if I can pet it, and then all of a sudden it's there, so you have that extra bit of and courage because you've kind of preset the scenario as a trigger to help you to break out of your normal pattern. And people like Dr. Joe Dispenza talk about this sort of thing
Mm.
a lot, where it's like, if changing up your pattern is the key to changing up your life. And
Right.
so I think that's a real simple way to come up with whatever. And I use a dog example, but just whatever the scenario is, in which case you're going to take that as a signal to initiate interaction.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So we call that in psychology, it's implementation intentions. And it is
Mm.
just that kind of, if I see this, then I will do this. You know, it's a very
Hmm.
simple kind of formula that just is more concrete than having that vague idea like, oh, I should be more sociable, but you don't
Mm.
really know how to do it.
Yeah.
And you know, this research shows that like actually, you know, it's effective even no matter what your kind of personality. So
Hmm.
there's this kind of older idea in psychology that personality was very fixed, that it wasn't malleable.
Hmm.
But the research shows, you know, we are more malleable than we
Yeah.
think. And
Yeah.
so, you know, you encourage kind of introverts and extroverts to do this, they all benefit. And, you know, it's really, we should look more at like personality as this kind of collection of, it's like patterns of thoughts and behavior that, you know, you can shift with processes like implementation intentions. Like just
Yeah.
because you might have a genetic disposition to be more introverted, if
Yeah.
you feel unsatisfied with that and you or you just feel that it's preventing you from getting the social connection that you need, you can slowly push yourself out of your comfort zone to achieve that.
Yeah. 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 I love that. Well, wow, I can't believe we're almost getting down to the end of this. That was gone very fast. As we sort of start winding down here, I'd like to switch gears a little bit. Um, you know, as the audience knows, I love to hear inspiring stories, stories of synchronicity, serendipity, a positive paranormal story, anything that you would, you know, you can think of that would be inspiring to share with the audience.
Yeah, sure. So I guess it's still on the topic of connection, but I think I love this story. It's a personal story. But to me, for someone who was pretty shy when I was growing up and even in my 20s, and, you know, I had close friends, but I kind of like very close friends, but I always kind of was always nervous about my ability to kind of create friends in the future. And that was why writing this book was so transformative. But you know what the research shows is that you can build that rapport incredibly quickly, and it can happen when you're least expecting it. Like people can start to feel like they have a, you know, like a close friendship, you know, even after a matter of like half an hour
Mm-hmm.
with someone. You just know that they're seeing the world in the same way that you are. And
Right.
so one of my like best friends today was just someone who I met in Sardinia when I was filming a short series of documentaries for the BBC, and she was the producer. You know, you'd think there could be lots of barriers. Like, I do speak Italian, but it's my second language. She speaks English, but that's her second language.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, like within our first conversation, we already just knew that we were kind of like a brother and sister.
Yeah.
Like that, we
Yeah. Yeah.
just it was like so many things about our backgrounds, our tastes, and things like literature, our approach to work, our general philosophy on life. Were just so similar. And, you know, if I hadn't gone to Sardinia or if my director had chosen a different producer, I would have never made that friendship. But the
Yeah.
fact is that you know, those opportunities are there for us. And that's what I hope with my book, that I can just inspire people to recognize that these things happen more often than you might expect. You know,
Mm-hmm.
the social support we crave really is within our reach often. And by just correcting those biases, those psychological barriers that I mentioned, you'll just find that they come to you more rapidly. And
Yeah.
that actually, you know, what you kind of thought was kind of impossible is actually very possible and very likely.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that's a really good point to make. Um, you know, the way I view it is that which is like unto itself is drawn, and or water seeks its own level. And so, you
Yeah,
know, I look at it through the lens of, you know, these soul contracts, people that, you know, you said
mm,
like a sister.
yeah,
I would be willing to, if I had to gamble and we could see beyond the veil, there's probably some real soul history there. That's why
mm,
that familiarity is there. And that is why, you know, it's instantly like, wow, I already know this person. You know, it's an old friend
yeah.
because, you know, I wrote a book and I start the book out. The first line is nice to meet you again for the first time, because I
Yeah,
believe that's what's happening to us all.
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
And we are calling in those souls that we have the most history with and contracts with, and we're meant to grow with, and, you know, by interacting with. And step one is, you know, putting yourself out there in some way, shape, or form opens up the possibility for the universe to meet you and to create those chance encounters that aren't chance at all, that are divinely designed. And so I think that is you've given some really great tools here for people to, you know, I think of a close friend in particular who's really struggled with the social stuff his whole life, and he's such an awesome person, and so talented and intelligent, and yet there's all this story around why not, and why he needs to be alone and doesn't have the social life he'd like to have. And I think we've really covered some great tools and techniques and perspectives to help people like that, especially like how do we just make small changes. It's like small little change. If I'm gonna take a plane from where I'm at in the world, Los Angeles, you're over in Europe, and I have a straight line. If I turn it just a little shift, I end up who knows where, some completely other continent over time. And so those little shifts have big impact over time, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's why I see it. And I really do think this isn't about acting in a way that's totally alien to your nature. Like it's like you said, it's small shifts, like small habits that you're
Yeah.
building that can just change your overall trajectory. And that's what we need to focus on. I think the
Yeah.
journey, like the path that we're taking, it's not like that we're looking for instant results, but it's
Yeah.
just that we know that by applying these principles, that you're just creating more opportunities for yourself to find what you want.
Yeah. Well, this has been an awesome journey with you today, David. What is the best way for people who want to connect with you? Obviously, the book's your new book's just coming out, and yeah, please share, all the things regarding connection and where they can find the book, etc.
Yeah. So the book will be, it's out on the 2nd of June, and it should be just available in any good bookstore. So, just go to where you'd normally get books. Amazon, Barnes and Noble, they're the obvious ones, but obviously, like any independent bookshop should be good. You can find out more about it and also see my portfolio of journalism at my website, davidrobson.me. I'm on X, D_A_Robson. I'm on Instagram, David A. Robson. I love hearing feedback. I love, chatting to people about their thoughts about my writing. So, yeah, please do connect.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation, and I do have one final question for you. My cliche closing question, and it is this: in 60 seconds or less, what is the meaning of life according to David Robson?
Yeah. Okay, I think the meaning of life will be different for each person, but I think we can try to identify our core values, the things that really matter to us. And I think the problem is that many of us just avoid doing that. We're so obsessed with the kind of trivialities of our life that we don't really think carefully about, underlying us, like what are the things that should be driving our actions. And then I think going out and pursuing those values and embodying them in the best way possible, I think that is the meaning of life, and that's what's going to give you purpose.
Wonderfully said. Well, David, thank you again, my friend, for taking the time and for all the work that you do in the world. And thank all of you out there for tuning in your beautiful brainwaves and incredible hearts to another episode. Until next time, journey well.